In 1939, a 6-year-old orphan sat alone in a room inside a University of Iowa speech clinic. She had been told she was here for speech therapy. She had never stuttered a day in her life. The examiner said she had all the classic signs of a stutterer: a weak breathing pattern, a nervous disposition, a predisposition to the condition. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she was 6 years old. She was in a white room with strangers. She believed them. Over the next few months, researchers repeated this scene with 22 orphan children. They were told their speech was broken. They were told they had a condition they could not control. They were corrected every time they spoke. By the end, several had developed genuine speech impediments that followed them for life. The experiment was never published. The data was buried. The lead researcher spent his career denying it ever happened. The study had no formal name. It was later called the Monster Study. For 60 years, the only reason anyone knew it existed was because one researcher could not live with the guilt.
To understand how this happened, you have to start with the man who designed it. Wendell Johnson was one of the most respected speech pathologists in America. He had built his entire career around one question: what makes someone stutter? The prevailing theory was that stuttering was a physical defect, something wrong with the tongue, the larynx, the wiring. Johnson disagreed. He had stuttered as a child himself. His theory was called diagnosogenic. Stuttering was not something you were born with, it was something you were taught. When a parent told a child they were stuttering, the child became anxious. That anxiety created the interruptions the adults were worried about. The diagnosis created the condition. Johnson needed to prove this theory. He could not test it on his own children. He could not test it on paying patients. So he went to the Iowa Soldiers' Orphans Home in Davenport, a state-run institution housing children with no parents, no legal protection, and no way to say no. The home had about 600 children. Most lost their parents to illness or abandonment. Some were taken from unfit homes. The state decided where they went. The children did not choose this place. The youngest was a toddler. The oldest was in their teens. None of them had a say in whether they participated. Johnson selected 22 children between the ages of 5 and 15. 10 of them stuttered occasionally already. 12 had normal, fluent speech. Some had mild repetitions. Some had no issues at all. All were about to be assigned a label that would change everything. He split them into 2 groups. The assignment was random. The only variable was which room they walked into first. The first group was praised for their speech. Every fluent sentence was rewarded with attention. The second group was told their speech was defective. They were corrected constantly, interrupted, told to try again. They were told that people around them were confused and frustrated by the way they talked. The fluent children, the ones who had never stuttered, were placed in the negative group. In the months that followed, the researchers documented everything. The children who were praised continued speaking normally. Some mild stutterers in this group actually improved. The children in the negative group began to change.
They started hesitating before they spoke. They developed facial tics. They refused to talk to the researchers at all. Several stopped volunteering answers in class. One boy with completely normal speech began repeating syllables. He developed a tremor in his lips when he tried to say his own name. A girl who had been talkative and outgoing became withdrawn. She told the examiner she stopped raising her hand because she did not want to say the wrong thing. Another child stopped speaking in complete sentences. He would whisper single words and then stop, waiting to be corrected. They were not becoming stutterers. They were becoming what they had been told they already were. The study measured their decline in neat categories. Each checkmark was a data point. Each data point was a child who would never sound the same again. The researchers called these results encouraging. Johnson's assistant was a graduate student named Mary Tudor. Her master's thesis was this study. She was the one who sat across from the children. She told them they were defective. She watched them change. Decades later, she told a journalist she had known something was wrong while she was still doing it. She kept expecting Johnson to stop the experiment. He never did. When the study ended, Johnson did not publish it. The results were too clean. They proved his theory perfectly. Stuttering was not a physical defect. It was created by telling a child they stuttered. He had the evidence. He would never show it to anyone. The proof required ruining the speech of healthy children. Johnson knew this would never be approved for publication. No journal would touch it. No university would claim it. The study existed but would never officially exist. He buried the data in his personal files. Her thesis was locked in the university archives. The children records were sealed. For 6 decades, the monster study did not officially exist. The children went back to the orphanage. They were never given follow-up therapy, never told the experiment was over. The psychological damage did not end when the last session ended. Life went on inside the institution, but something had settled into the children that would never be unpacked.
A follow-up investigation decades later found that several still carried speech problems into adulthood. Some never spoke fluently again. The words were inside them. They just could not get them out past the wall built there when they were young enough to believe what adults told them. Others developed social anxiety so severe they could not hold jobs. The world does not stop for invisible wounds. One boy entered the orphanage as a normal, healthy child. He left with a stutter so bad he could barely communicate. He spent the rest of his life working low-wage jobs and avoiding conversation. Another participant, once outgoing and talkative, grew into an adult who refused to speak about her childhood at all. Her family did not know she had been in a study until journalists found her. The article listed her as a participant. Her grandchildren saw it. They asked what happened. She had spent 60 years not saying it out loud. When the experiment was finally uncovered in 2001 by a journalist named Jim Dyer, most participants were in their late 60s or 70s. Several refused to talk. One hung up the phone. Another said, "I have spent my entire life trying to forget that place." Jim Dyer published the story in 2001. The silence from the former participants was louder than anything they could have said. When the story broke, the University of Iowa issued a formal apology. They called the study regrettable. This was an understatement. In 1939, the study was already against every ethical principle psychology had established. Everyone who walked past that room knew something was wrong. No one turned the handle. The Nuremberg Code had not been written yet, but the idea that you do not harm children for science was not new. The Hippocratic Oath had existed for over 2,000 years. The promise was not complicated. It just required someone to keep it. Johnson knew what he was doing. That is why he never published it. The university paid an undisclosed settlement to the surviving participants in 2007. Part of the settlement required the details to remain confidential. The participants signed away their right to speak. They got money. The university got silence. The question nobody could answer, did 22 orphans have to be harmed to prove that stuttering was caused by telling children they stutter? Because the theory itself turned out to be correct. Johnson was right. The diagnosogenic model is now widely accepted. The intervention that works is praise, not correction. Today, every speech pathology student learns Johnson's theory. They also learn the monster study. They learn that you can be correct and still be wrong. He was right about the science. He was wrong about everything that mattered. The monster study is cited in textbooks as an example of unethical research. It is used to teach students what not to do. It is also used to teach something more uncomfortable. Ethics are what you do when nobody is watching, and the children are already in the room. But the data itself was never destroyed. Some researchers have argued the results could still be valuable. The question is whether proof obtained by harming vulnerable children was worth having. Wendell Johnson died in 1965. He never publicly acknowledged what he had done. His obituaries listed him as one of the most influential speech pathologists of the 20th century. History is written by the people who publish first. Johnson published his theories. He published his legacy. He never published the names of the 22 children. Mary Tudor said in a later interview that she had never fully recovered from the study. She was 24. She was following instructions. She was participating in something she knew was wrong because the man in charge told her it was science. She said she thought about the children often. She said she wished she had stopped it. The children themselves did not get a say. Not in whether they participated, not in what was done to them, not in the apology, not in any of it. They were not told they were in an experiment. They were not told when it ended. They were not told that the woman correcting their speech was a graduate student testing a theory that needed them to be broken in order to work. The girl who sat in that white room in 1939 is in her 90s now if she is still alive. She has carried a diagnosis someone else gave her for over 8 decades. She never needed speech therapy.
She needed someone to tell the examiner to stop. She was told her speech was defective before she had ever said a single wrong word. She believed them. Children always do.